The true story of the Chippendales dance troupe is fueled by jealousy and greed, with chapters including arson, assassins, and dumb business decisions. Keep watching to learn everything you need to know about the surprisingly dark history of Chippendales. Chippendales is a uniquely American creation, but the man who founded the business was actually born outside of the United States. Born in India in 1946, Soman Steve Banerjee came to this country like so many others seeking the American dream. And he worked hard at it, taking a job as a janitor and working his way up to owning several mobile gas stations in Los Angeles. In 1975, Banerjee decided to expand his empire. Along with his business partner Bruce Nahan, he purchased a local LA nightclub and named it Destiny 2. He had a dream of becoming the owner of a classy club, a place he could walk into and feel like a big shot. But alas, that business decision didn't work out as planned and the club failed to become profitable. Nahan and Banerjee tried several desperate gimmicks, including backgammon games, dinner theater, wrestling nights, and even magic shows. Nothing worked. But that didn't stop Banerjee, and the final gimmick that he and Nahan tried, the all-male strip show, launched the club into instant success. When seeking business advice, it's usually a good idea to avoid people with a high potential for becoming murderers, but Steve Banerjee failed to heed that advice. As reported by Los Angeles Magazine, one of the regular customers at Destiny 2 was a sketchy guy named Paul Snider, who liked to refer to himself as the Jewish pimp. He'd gained some fame through his wife, Playboy playmate Dorothy Stratton. Snider promoted Stratton, photographing her and launching her career as a model, but he also abused her terribly and would kill her and himself in 1980. But in 1979, Snider and Stratton were instrumental to the launch of the Chippendales. Snider suggested the idea of an all-male strip show to Banerjee, and Stratton actually came up with the iconic outfit of bow ties and cuffs. The idea hit a sweet spot in American cultural history during an era that also featured the women's liberation movement and the mainstream attention of erotic films. As for the name Chippendales, that came from an 18th century furniture designer, as Banerjee thought it evoked pure class. Just as today, Los Angeles in 1979 was an extremely diverse city. That was one reason it was an ideal destination for an ambitious immigrant like Steve Banerjee to find success. So you would be forgiven for thinking that he would want to make his male strip show as diverse as possible. But when Banerjee launched Chippendales, there were almost no dancers of color. As reported by Los Angeles Magazine, in the early days of the club, the dancers that Chippendales hired were almost exclusively white. Banerjee was obsessed with having a classy club, which essentially meant white. In fact, Chippendales was a largely white island in the midst of one of the country's most diverse cities, as white dancers performed for audiences that were also overwhelmingly white. As time went on and the brand became nationally recognized, Chippendales did hire the occasional black dancer to perform, but typically just one at a time, with the main group of dancers still remaining largely white. The more you learn about the history of Chippendales, the more you realize that Steve Banerjee wasn't exactly the best businessman. Despite that, after hitting upon the idea of an all-male strip show, his club did become an enormous success. Every night, there were lines around the block as hundreds of women would pay a lot of money to crowd inside and be entertained by the buff and oiled dancers on the stage.
When you get on stage with 1,000 women, you're going to have fun. The roars and the craziness, it's a real high.
That kind of success naturally inspired others to try and imitate the Chippendales formula. When Banerjee was faced with competing local clubs that sapped some of his business, he could have upped his game or found ways to innovate. But instead, he attempted to hire people to burn down at least two competitors, Moody's Disco in Santa Monica and the Red Onion restaurant in Marina del Rey. Both attempts were unsuccessful, as the competing clubs suffered only minor damage. And as Chippendales' fame grew further, copycats continued to spring up nationwide, making arson an ineffective, not to mention illegal strategy. For his part, Banerjee pleaded guilty when he was indicted for attempted arson. Nick DeNoia was a successful television producer who was hired by Steve Banerjee in 1981 to class up the dance routines and stage productions at Chippendales. He would quickly go on to outclass the founder of the business in every way. As reported by Los Angeles Magazine, he came up with the gimmicks and costumes that really put the club on the map, including routines based on Frankenstein, superheroes, and the legendary unknown flasher who performed wearing a paper hat. DeNoia also convinced Banerjee to sign away lucrative aspects of the business, allowing DeNoia to run an East Coast version of the club and a touring production more or less independently, and to keep most of the profits. DeNoia jotted down an agreement on a napkin that gave him control over the new endeavor and a 50% cut of its revenue. Banerjee signed, but he apparently didn't understand that the language granted DeNoia control in perpetuity. What's more, DeNoia eventually started becoming the face of the Chippendales. As the brand grew in fame and value, it was DeNoia who showed up on talk shows like Sally Jesse Raphael and Donahue. Banerjee began to seethe with jealousy as he felt that his contribution as co-founder was being forgotten. He also believed that DeNoia was taking credit for his idea, and the media was letting him get away with it. Compounding Steve Banerjee's jealousy and anger towards Nick DeNoia was the fact that he wasn't really a great businessman, as he mishandled his finances pretty badly. His problems began when he simply failed to pay his taxes. As the bill for his back taxes swelled, he compounded his financial problems with other mistakes. Lending the Chippendales name to merchandise was a great idea, and a project to create a calendar featuring the dancers in steamy poses was a surefire hit. But Banerjee mishandled the whole thing and wound up with a calendar where every month had 31 days. The reprint cost him $70,000, which is close to $200,000 when adjusted for inflation. Banerjee also miscalculated when he let his jealousy of Nick DeNoia get the better of him. He became incensed when DeNoia began appearing on TV and became celebrated as the genius behind the club. After DeNoia had created a successful East Coast touring version of the show, Banerjee decided to create a competing West Coast tour. But DeNoia sued him because Banerjee had given him the legal rights to that idea, and the lawsuit devastated Banerjee's finances even further. When faced with internal disagreements, most business professionals pursue legal remedies. That is to say, they sue or have their lawyers negotiate a settlement. It's a slow and often frustrating process, but it has the advantage of keeping everyone alive and out of jail. But when Steve Banerjee decided that he'd been treated badly by his business partner, he decided to take a decidedly different route for justice: hiring an assassin. Nick DeNoia was a ruthless businessman who basically tricked Banerjee into signing away control of what would become the most lucrative aspect of his business. The acrimony eventually led Banerjee to hire a hitman named Ray Colin in 1987 to kill DeNoia. Colin farmed the job out to a local drug addict named Louis, who posed as a messenger and walked right into DeNoia's office and shot him in the face.
On April 7, 1987, he was gunned down.
And that wasn't the only death that Steve Banerjee was plotting that year. Back in 1979, he bought the club that would become the Chippendales with business partner Bruce Nahan, and in 1987, Nahan remained a co-owner of the business. After hiring a hitman to kill Nick DeNoia, Banerjee figured that he could take out two problems all at once. So he also planned to have Nahan killed in order to secure complete control over the Chippendales empire. Nahan was supposed to travel to New York to meet with DeNoia, but he had to make last-minute changes because of an illness in his family, so he never made the trip, which ended up saving his life. Despite being as incompetent a criminal as he was a businessman, Steve Banerjee almost got away with hiring someone to kill Nick DeNoia. After a year, the police investigation into the death had gone cold. Hitman Ray Colin had farmed out the job to a local criminal who posed as a messenger in order to gain access to DeNoia's office. And nobody in DeNoia's offices got a good look at the killer, so no progress was made on that front. Without any suspects or witnesses, the police then tried to figure out what the motive for the murder had been, but they couldn't find any concrete connection between the killing and Banerjee, or anyone else. So by 1988, it looked like he had gotten everything he wanted. DeNoia was out of the picture, and his family sold his interest in the Chippendales back to Banerjee for a relatively paltry $1.3 million. According to K. Scott McDonald, co-author of Deadly Dance, The Chippendales Murders, it was actually worth approximately 10 times that. In 1988, Steve Banerjee thought he'd discovered a new way to succeed in business in the form of killing people. He'd successfully hired an assassin to kill his partner Nick DeNoia, after all. And not only had the police failed to link him to the death, but DeNoia's family had also sold him their stake in Chippendales at a huge discount. So it's little wonder that Banerjee thought that this deadly strategy would work again. Chippendale's success had led to a crop of copycat clubs, and in the early 90s, a group of former dancers banded together with a former MC at the club named Reed Scott. Their idea was to launch a similar show called Adonis, the Men of Hollywood. This angered Banerjee, so he hired a hitman named Strawberry to carry out the deeds by using a cyanide mixture that Banerjee prepared himself. But Strawberry became nervous and called up an old contact at the Drug Enforcement Agency, who in turn put him in touch with the FBI. The FBI then staged a sting operation and gathered enough evidence to charge Banerjee with attempted murder, arson, and racketeering. They even had him on tape bragging about being able to flee back to India if he ever got into trouble in the US.
At last, they had it all on tape.
Arrested and charged with arson, attempted murder, and other major crimes, Steve Banerjee had one last move to make as the walls closed in on him. The FBI became aware that he intended to flee to India if given the opportunity. He knew he was about to lose everything, so he thought of something clever. He pleaded guilty and then arranged to have all of his assets, including his stake in Chippendales, transferred to his wife, Irene. But that wasn't the soundest of plans. Irene moved to divorce Banerjee and sell Chippendales, which would have left him with nothing. And with the FBI arguing against bail, he would have had no chance to escape back to India, where he thought he would be able to marry again and start over under a new name. His options were running out, and he ultimately chose to end everything. The day before he was set to be sentenced, he tied his bedsheets into a makeshift noose and killed himself in his jail cell. The authorities claimed that while Banerjee had been depressed, they didn't have any reason to believe he would take his own life. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, 8255.